clicker somewhere? Okay, forward and reverse. Okay, great, thanks. Yeah, so this is a follow-up to maybe even a follow-up. I'm trying to remember. We, a panel a while ago, we started talking about how spam vendors approach things. It became very obvious that nobody has any idea how modern spam technology works. Why did this message get blocked? Why did it not get blocked? So we did a little bit of depth in Miami, a little detail on, I tried to keep it generic. I've actually worked with or for multiple spam vendors in my career, going all the way back to email, fraud and spam prevention. And fundamentally, we do very similar things, no matter which company you're talking to. And probably the most important thing, just a little recap of some of the stuff we talked about in Miami, is it probably works completely differently than the way anyone thinks that spam filters work. Most people think there's a bunch of people sitting in a room, writing rules, creating filters, staring at stuff, deciding what to block and not block, and nothing could be further from the truth. That's, maybe it was true 20 years ago when the first email spam arrived, but pretty quickly it was proven that that is ineffective and doesn't work. We are, at our heart, I won't go through all the details we went through in Miami. The heart of the technology, and again, Proofpoint technology or similar technology, we're all big data engines, right? That approach of manually trying to keep up with fraud does not work. We're all dynamic big data engines. And the other key takeaway is this stuff is extremely dynamic, right? You're trying to remember, we're building models to detect things, to detect bad guys, right? And we can train these models and put in rules and filters and feed new data into it so it becomes more and more intelligent over time. But what they're trying to do is detect the bad person. They're trying to detect the same person who's spending their entire 12 hours a day trying to get around that. So lots of talks about machine learning and AI, and I love all these conversations. AI is great for helping you figure out new ways to do things or train systems to do common tasks and do them more easily. Remember, we're trying to have systems do this stuff in real time to detect a person who's purposely trying to avoid us. It becomes a very, very complex task very quickly. So one of the things I wanted to focus on this, and it's great, I've heard this term mentioned multiple times throughout the morning, so we'll go into a little bit of detail. I wanted to talk about the topic of impersonation and differentiate that from spoofing. I've heard both words this morning, so let's start with a little bit of clarification of what we mean by the two. Spoofing is I went to Webster's to look it up, and the definition was horrible, so I made it my own. Think of spoofing as presenting a fake ID, or we talked about calling, presenting a fake caller ID. So in the mobile messaging world, right, you're forging the sending address, and there are cases of that. They've become much less prevalent over time due to new technologies, stir-shaken, all these mechanisms to validate the sending entity. A couple examples that are up there. That first one is alphanumeric sender ID, so not something we have to deal with in North America, but a very, very common cause of spoofing that you see in other parts of the world. The incidents of that have decreased significantly. I mean, I've launched the Sender ID registry a while back. That's helped, so now you can validate it's coming from the right location. But it still does occur, and you see examples of Sender ID impersonation. The second one's a special use case that we saw maybe a year and a half ago. That is PNC, one of the short codes that PNC uses. That's not PNC's phone number to call. That's a fraudster. And in that case, a scammer found a vulnerability in an MMS network. It's actually an MMS message. And they found a way to bypass the network authentication. So at that point, once you bypass the network authentication, you can pretend whoever you were. The network operator cleaned that up. But that's an example of spoofing, right? Impersonating the caller ID or the A party. Spoofing. Impersonation, think of impersonation as putting on a disguise, right? We're not trying to present a fake ID and fake the caller ID. We're using some other mechanism to convey that we're someone else. So The first example, someone's claiming their BOA security. Pretty easy to do. You got a full text message or maybe MMS message where you can pretend to be anything you want. You can type whatever characters you want and pretend to be whomever you want. Remember, we're talking about humans that are receiving stuff on a handset. They're pretty gullible. So something comes from BOA security, or it might be my parents. They don't know what it is. They read that, they think it's BOA security. I get questions from my parents on a weekly basis, practically, between this and email. Second example is a lookalike sender ID. We see tons of these. This data was pulled, I think, just a few days ago. Santander UK obviously looks just like Santander. If you're not thinking, that's a proper message from Santander, and someone could fall victim to that. And then last example, this is actually someone impersonating who was a CEO of Proofpoint, Sean Willey. So this is a variation of business email compromise. In this case, it's done over mobile messaging. Simple attack. That's just a normal phone number, and all it took is I think it was an administrative assistant in our company that received a text message, thought it was a Sean Willey. Luckily, she did follow her proper training and didn't fall for it, but we see this attack all the time. And that's really important to remember. These look pretty dumb. You can train people. How could someone fall for this stuff? We see gobs and gobs of this stuff every day. If it wasn't effective, it wouldn't exist, right? Those guys would go off and do something else. So as silly as it is that people fall for this stuff, it must be effective because that's why it exists today. So what do we see? There are instances of spoofing still in networks, but impersonation is really king. This is what people are falling for. The most common tactics we see are lookalike sender IDs, so outside North America. Pick your favorite sender ID, you run a fuzzy match for that in data that we have, and we find hundreds, right? Santander is spelled a million different ways, Lloyd's spelled a million different ways. The other form is content deception. So you have the full text of a message, put whatever you want in there. Not very difficult to pretend that you're someone else inside the content. And then a growing area is content deception using images. So MMS, not prevalent around everywhere in the world. Certainly in North America, we still use MMS. Now you can use graphics to fake who you are. RCS is growing. Isn't that great? Well, now we have graphics to make it even more convincing that you might be someone else. So let me go through a couple of examples. Sender ID impersonation. This took minutes to just run this data. This is Santander, all the different types of scams we saw. This, I think we just looked within 24 hours. All of these were prevalent in some of the data we have across Europe. Again, not something we worry about in North America, where we have sender IDs, but very convincing in other places. So content deception, this is where you have the full text of the message and can put whatever you want in that text. Not picking on Bank of America, but every single bank across North America gets abused in similar ways. But here's just some examples of impersonation of Bank of America using content deceptions. So different spellings of it, BOA, Bank of America, EDD is, I think, their credit card brand. All different ways for someone to believe that they just received a valid message from Bank of America that's not really Bank of America. To make things more complex, this is what I'm showing on the screen here is kind of how it renders on a handset. Handsets are pretty good at manipulating fonts and making them all look nice and pretty and easily readable. If you render that in a different way, this is actually what's shown in the message. So they're using, I talked about this a bit last time, different type of obfuscation to hide the fact that it's Bank of America. Tweaking letters using lookalike character sets, everything possible. So when you look at these messages, they look pretty silly, but this is the sophistication they're getting into to try to do impersonation without something as simple as the obvious word of Bank of America inside the message. I did a little demo of this for last time. Fun little utility if anyone wants to know the URL to do this. So Unicode characters, it's a gigantic character set of all these little different things. There's a cool website called Unicode Confusables. You can type in any phrase you want, and it'll show you all the different ways. So you typed in Bank of America, since we're picking on them a little bit. Any guess how many ways there are to spell Bank of America? 1,000? Million? I don't know. 165 quintillion ways to spell the word Bank of America, and it will still look like Bank of America. And that doesn't even include BOA, EDD, all that kind of stuff, right? We've probably seen maybe not 165 quintillion, probably maybe 2 or 3 quintillion. We've seen most variations of it, though. Yeah, pretty awesome. Now, there's plenty of technology to deal with this, right? We talked about normalization and some of the stuff we do as spam vendors. We're not writing 165 quintillion spam filters. That wouldn't work very well. We do a lot of work to try and normalize this down and figure out that there's some reference inside the message. But it shows the extent of what they're capable of going through to do that form of impersonation. So last form, and probably one of the scariest ones, but growing, is content deception using images. So that first one I actually pulled directly off the Royal Bank of Canada website as an example of how they're educating their consumers. In this case, they can use a logo to impress the identity of who they are, and the text might have something completely different into it, or it could have a link underneath the logo, so you don't even see any text at all, and you can click on that logo. Next one is Payments Canada. The last one just is mind-boggling. This is actually an MMS message. The font's pretty small, so I don't know if you can read it. This is like a full IRS refund notice jammed into an MMS message with a $48,000 refund and a phone number to call to get your $48,000 refund or correct the bank account in there. Pretty amazing, but kind of scary that they can use images to convey that concept of impersonation. RCS is kind of here, kind of coming. I don't know where it is. We've been talking about it coming for a long time. It'll be here at some point. RCS is great. Now, MMS, which isn't widely adopted worldwide, RCS is going to be it. Rich media, all this great stuff. We were talking about logos and great ways how RCS is going to save the world, because we'll see the logo at the top of the message. Give you a clue, the logo doesn't have to be at the top of the message. It can be in the message. And remember, we're talking about gullible humans. So they get a text message. They're not going to look at the top. They see Royal Bank of Canada logo inside the message. They're going to think it's from Royal Bank of Canada. So we definitely see this as a huge and growing threat vector. As people get more and more used to receiving rich media content from the brands, now that's going to be impersonated as well. So Proofpoint works with both very large enterprises as well as large brands, as well as service providers. So we've been working quite a bit with some of the very large enterprises, particularly banks, are big Proofpoint customers for various Proofpoint products. And they're the ones that face the most, or have the most to lose in all this, when you think about it, right? If their brand gets impersonated, people can drain their PNC bank accounts. All these guys have huge fraud departments. And they all have an effort. It took me 5 minutes to go to a bunch of websites, PNC Bank, Royal Bank of Canada, Chase Bank, Wells Fargo. All of them have fraud pages, right, that are designed to educate consumers. So another quick quiz. How many of you have gone to your bank's fraud page and read up and memorized all the phone numbers that are on there? Everybody, right? Yeah, every time I get a text message, I go to that page and check it out. So I'm not chastising the efforts to do this. It's a great thing. It doesn't work. Look, nobody does that. But that, when you think about a brand, they don't control the servers, right? The servers are controlled by the network operators in here, but they're the ones that have the most to lose here. So they're doing what they can. They'll educate consumers. They'll do what they can. It's not going to be that effective, right? This is a great opportunity for, rather than consumers having to learn this stuff, can't we train the machines to do that, right? So as technology vendors, that's one of the things we want to do. We should be able to identify this. We shouldn't have to rely on a human. Humans make mistakes. But there's a lot of challenges to that, but also great opportunity. It's a very complex opportunity to connect all these dots. The brands don't control the servers. The MNOs control the servers. The technology vendors have technologies that may be able to help with this. If we can pull all that together, this is what's going to be required to protect that. So I can tell you the technology is there to protect some of this stuff. There's a lot of complexities out there, but being able to detect that there's some form of impersonation of PNC Bank is out there, validating against what PNC thinks is their valid sender IDs or their valid short codes, dealing with all the permutation and variation and doing intent analysis. Some of the technology is there, but it is complicated. That technology has to operate at the MNOs, and data has to get back to the brands because this stuff is not as easy as we think. Good example, one of the banks contacted us, says, oh my God, you should block everything in the email to SMS vector, one of the things we run some filtering for, that contains a reference to our bank. Piece of cake, no problem. Everything from this bank should come from that short code, right? Okay, we'll do whatever you had. Within 5 minutes, we get a phone call, turn that off, turn that off. One of the major banks, top 5 banks in the US, had no idea that one of their divisions was still sending out transaction notices over email to SMS. Who does that? People still do that. Mike Bloom gave an example of another bank that I think if you go to their website, it says you will only receive communication from these 2 or 3 short codes. They've registered over 5,000 10DLC numbers and have enabled every single regional bank across the United States to also send out information. So what they put on their website is not even true. And they have no control over the fact that every regional bank across the US has the ability to send that stuff out. So it is more complex. And some of the complexities in working this stuff out require data to be shared. And these are some of the hurdles that we face is that bank, as an example, doesn't even know all the different ways that their brand is being used. That data lives at the mobile operators. They're processing messages every day. They've got CDRs, they've got logs, but things like data privacy and security tend to get in the way of that. So it's difficult, very, very difficult hurdles to connect all these dots. We've got some technology that can help. MNOs have the network that sees this type of fraud, but PNC or Bank of America, or whoever the brand is, knows this stuff the best. So a couple of the hurdles we have to handle, data privacy and legal is probably the number one, right? If we share data, we have a better chance of stopping this. That topic been bouncing around for a long time. The business relationships are another one. This does require some effort, requires technology, requires servers, requires people to analyze data. Who's going to fund all this and put this and pay for this stuff to go into mobile networks? So those have to be addressed as well. And then the technology, I won't say that's the easiest part. Probably the most mature part in all this is, we've been investing in technology to do this. There's some complex things to solve, but we do think we can, those are easier to tackle than some of the data privacy and legal concerns. So, kind of ending this with, I know the Olympics are coming up. And this is, of course, the wrong logo because this is Winter Olympics, not Summer Olympics, but that is Team Canada after their Olympic win. Hopefully, there's ways that we can work together as a team. We have kicked off some efforts with a few MNOs, as well as major brands, starting to approach the topic of, can we get some legal agreements in place to share data and figure out how we can better detect impersonation and share data. So it's a long road to do that, but working as a team, we hope we can be successful in this. And that is my end.
Questions?
Okay, we all know that RCS is around the corner and practically here now, and that means encrypted content. What is somebody like Proofpoint going to do when all of this content that you're managing to detect on SMS and lots of MMS is now completely encrypted?
Yep, great question. A couple things. So, it's unencrypted at the device, right? So there is opportunity to do device-based filtering as one option. The spam report and feedback data, obviously if it's unencrypted on the device and someone clicks the button to send that data, now you can at least trace the origins of that. Where did this thing come from? A2P messaging and RCS business messaging does go through servers where Google, even if you're using Google Drive, Google is looking at providing some hooks to examine some of that data. So all the bits and pieces do have to come together. It's going to require some new techniques, but the fact that the RCS messages do get unencrypted on the handset and we do have those feedback mechanisms, that's at least going to provide an unencrypted input into the origins of it. We won't be able to do on-the-fly image scanning of a P2P message. That's going to be encrypted, but we can at least use that post-mortem based on a spam report to identify.
P2P is the part that's worrying me the most, because that's where a lot of the threat actors are going to come from.
Yep, yeah, and they're going to use techniques like we saw there, right? It's a P2P phone number. Exactly. So tracing it back to the source number is going to be key, because we're not going to be able to directly examine the content.
Sometimes the users are not going to realize that they had gotten a spam message and will not give you that feedback.
We get enough. I mean, we're collecting feedback from iOS and Android today in enormous amounts. And so even if only a percentage click that button, it's a strong enough signal. I mean, we're talking tens of millions of feedback points per day once that iOS button was enabled.
Does anyone else have a question?
Thank you, Mike.
Great,
That was
thank you.
great.